Greetings, Summoners. Today's topic will be about gate power, or GP, and the encounter rate, game terms found in the Shin Megami Tensei tabletop role-playing game, Devil City, Tokyo 2000X. Some of this information may be pertinent to Tokyo Conception as well, but I don't think it uses encounter rate, and the nature of the demons, how their data is calculated, what skills they have, is so different between the two games that not all of the advice here will be applicable to both. But this is a GM advice video, and it's probably going to be broken into two main parts. I do want to focus on just gate power and encounter rate in this video, and in a future video I want to more broadly cover the phases of the game, how the rulebook expects you to run a game, and in doing so, the rulebook can better support newer game masters in, having the confidence to run a game for their friends. And then maybe another video separate from that on sort of the steps and processes you can take to actually design your own scenarios in a way that's going to hit a lot of those key points that the book outlines, like keywords and the phases again, where to fit in an approach phase, how to break up the dungeon phase, how much of a dungeon should it be, things like that. But on gate power, or GP, it is basically just an abstraction of the party's level. Now, I am pretty familiar with how gate power works, so the way that I use is I actually use it as it's like a per adventure, per scenario value that kind of represents the challenge rating. If you're familiar with D&D or Pathfinder, it's basically an equivalent to challenge rating, but it's a little simpler to wrap your head around than challenge rating. It still has some of the same issues as challenge rating, where two CR3 enemies in D&D have totally different stats, attacks, resistances, number that they're supposed to be appearing in. Usually it's just one, but sometimes there's groups. And all of these different factors change what actually happens when that encounter intersects with the player party. And so that's true here as well, but GP basically is a stand-in for level, whether it's the party's level or a demon's level. And so it's quite simple. You just have a range from 1 to 100 or more of all the levels in the game. And so if something is GP 30, you can expect the enemy to be around level 30. If you plan an adventure and you give it, say, the first session that I ran, that I made myself, I set it at GP 12, I think, and the player party were created at level 7, because I planned for the boss to be level 12. This doesn't mean that all the items up to GP 12 are available, because the players had to stay under their own level. But it basically gave some wiggle room for the encounter design. Now, let's take a quick look at encounter rate. So encounter rate is another abstraction, which is based on GP, which is based on level. I really don't think that they should have created encounter rates, because throughout various skill descriptions and other rules in the book, they almost use all three terms interchangeably, which is a little confusing, which is why I'm making the video. Basically, encounter rate A is anything up to the GP. this would be equivalent to just, instead of writing encounter rate A, just saying up to GP, and in parentheses, it even says what all of their GP equivalents are, making the need for this letter grading system very unnecessary, because they already have a shorthand for it that's shorter than the letter grade that they're doing. Even in the Japanese kanji, I think that's 4 kanji plus a letter, and so GP plus a number. It's just more straightforward. Why they added it, not 100% sure. But it exists, so we'll talk about it as well. They all have their own descriptions for, sort of what they represent. Gate power is not actually defined within the terms of items. So like GP have GP limits or requirements. Like, hey, this, rocket launcher is GP 50. So if you're playing, you're level 10 and the adventure you're in is GP 15, then someone's going to call the cops on you if you have a bazooka, because that's way above the GP limit. So GP standing for gate power. This is in reference specifically to demons and sort of how large the rip between the two dimensions is, and what power level of demons can cross over and manifest in the real world. Encounter rate, and it may not have been the best translated term to use. It's a little too literal. You can think of it as a danger rating, threat rating, security risk level. And it applies both to demons, but also to items. So encounter rate A describes items that are up to the GP, meaning that shops will stock them. Passerbys on the street probably won't freak out about it. You're not going to be stopped by the cops or the army. And then this sort of gradation just goes up and up and up, all the way up to an F rating, where basically it's plus 20 levels, and that's a very big range. Typically, you almost never see anything over encounter rate C for an adventure, just because the level difference is so high that the player party would already have to be quite strong, like probably mid 30s or higher, before you should even think about doing D, E, or F tier enemies, and certainly don't give them items of those levels, because those are going to be way more powerful than the actual player itself, rather than an add-on to the player's baseline numbers and skills and stuff. So that's kind of the gist of gate power and encounter rating. And I mean, obviously you should read this whole chapter on the Game Master section if you're going to be GMing, so I'm not going to read it out loud to you. But this section here is kind of the important part about, well, it's jumping around. Basically, it says that SMTX you should play between levels 5 and 40. PCs below level 10 have uncertainties in their primary attack rolls. This means that your stats are low, your target numbers are low, you're going to be missing a lot. And my personal recommendation is that you start at level 10 or higher. Because that's where you can have a lot of fun building the character. You start having a lot of skills. You can put your stats where you want without needing to put everything all into one stat like you probably should be doing in the early levels. Because once you hit, 100% target number in strength or magic or whatever your character's primary attack is, you can start putting a little more into luck or a little more into vitality or If you want to use melee weapons and ranged weapons, then you split your agility. You start having more build variety. And I know that the min maxing and character building is not everything, but level 10, level 15, those are pretty decent starting points. I personally enjoy level 9, level 7 to 9, but my players are a little bit more experienced with the game. But yeah, once you hit past level 20, but more realistically, maybe like level 30, and especially after level 40, when PCs are going to have their third class for human PCs, they're going to have a ton of stats, a ton of skills, just the versatility that they have to be able to deal with things be much higher. So that's a good explanation of like the level brackets. I think there's a lot of people want to start at level 1 because it's the lowest number and that's what you do, and people do that in D&D. And I've been playing with my group for a long time, and we used to always restart campaigns at level 1 every time, and it was just it got, not that it's old, but we would restart so many campaigns, and there's only so many ways that you can build a level 1 character in D&D. The same's kind of true in this game, where it's like you get one class, you have one stat point to spend, you probably have one or two skills, and then all your target numbers are sub 30%. So you just miss everything and you suck. And D&D is not that bad, but that's what you'll be facing up against in SMTX, also Tokyo Conception. The same math applies. So don't do it. I recommend minimum level 5, but you should probably be aiming for 9 to 15. Random encounters. So this is more GM advice stuff. I don't really use these rules for random encounters. Especially because like these are insane encounter rates. I have lots of other dice. I play virtually, so I can roll any formula of dice. That I want. So I just put it at 1 and 6, like the old school chance. Then what's funny though is that because they want the encounter roll to be rolled by the players and it's a percent roll, you could spend fate on it and it can crit and fumble. Just, I don't know, whatever. Just make a proper encounter table. It's just kind of dumb. This talks more about how to pick the demons, how to choose your bosses. Like this is all scenario help guide, and it's only a few pages. Like what are we talking here? 3 pages? Basically 3 pages just of GM advice on making a scenario, and over half of it is tied up on just gate power, which is just dumb. Because GP is already explained. Counter rates aren't really needed. Anyways, so we have a good idea that GP is usually you want it set around the party level unless you have let's see if we can get down to this is the interest scenario. Is the world section after? No, it's before. I don't know why I don't use the bookmarks that I so painstakingly set. So here, the gate power and counter rate, it's explained again. It's like literally copy pasted, which is really funny. But we can see the different settings have GP values. So this is before demons are really starting to take over the world. Devil City Tokyo is the book's unique version of the setting. And there's a lot about Tokyo here if you didn't know. It's cool stuff. Here's the map. What I wanted to show is here. So they define each of these areas, and they have a GP rating, and they have the demons that you can encounter, and the bosses and special bosses that'll be in the area. So you can um, have sort of like a living world. The whole city of Tokyo, the different districts and areas can each have their own GP rating. So you can have areas that are, here's 15, here's 10 to 20. If you're starting off at level 5, you're not going to be able to adventure, so to speak, in these areas because they're just too high level of enemies. So you can have some natural progression through different areas around the Devil City Tokyo, which is really cool. Most of them are in this 10 to 20 range, but that's also where uh, most of the play is probably going to be in that range. And similar to old school D&D, which doesn't really apply here per se, but right, like you have the level 1 town, you've got a starter dungeon, you've got, you can claw your way through some treasure and then you level up a little bit. But eventually the play kind of shifts into something either on a grander scale, or you have to leave that starting town and find more difficult enemies, more quests of higher stakes. Um, so there's lots of different ways to go about it, whether you're statting up areas that you can drop different levels of adventures in, or if you're just making episodic adventure by adventure cases, in which case you'll probably just be using the party's level, maybe that plus 5, as the scenario's gate power. That's the basic recommendation, and I do recommend that too. So let's take a quick look at some demons. Because how do you choose demons? The basic idea is that the demon's level should be comparable to the gate power. If we have a GP 15 adventure planned and you want machines to appear, or even just a machine, the Bitball level 15 is the perfect choice. There are some that's the at a glance choice. That's the easy way to pick. And you can go to the index and you can see demons by level. So this is where you're going to want to reference. These are the page numbers on the side. So we look at level 15. Oh, look, there's Bitball. Oh, there's also a Nightmare and the Suicide Unit, Army Zombie Gagason. All cool stuff. If you want to pick a boss, you choose something that's 1 to 5 levels higher. I know that the GP thing, it even said that a plus 10 boss level could work, but like, not really. If the players are level 40, plus 10 might work, but if the players are low level, that's not going to work. You should probably be looking at an enemy that's plus 5, but you can make any demon a boss by using its boss HP and MP, as well as the other boss traits, like giving them 2 actions per turn and that kind of thing. So let me actually go back to Bitball, because that's a pretty good example. And the ones are right around it are a good example. All right. So you want to use the indexes and the demon lists to find the level range of foes that you want to appear in your adventure. And that's where you start. But just choosing based on level alone is going to run into the age-old issue with challenge ratings, where the level number, the threat level, whatever, does not account for your player characters It doesn't know how many player characters you have or how few. It doesn't know what resistances or weaknesses they have or that the demon has in comparison to their attacks. And so, this isn't to say that you should spend a whole ton of time agonizing over which demons to make and how to make the coolest and best and most fair um, encounters possible, because that's not really the point. Because there's nothing that the players can do inherently to avoid a lot of those kind of situations. And that's where a little bit of scenario planning comes in. So we'll take the bit ball. Let's say you want them to be kind of a difficult fight, so the players are actually level 12, and maybe you set the GP to level 12, and so plus 3 GP is encounter rate B ish. And this is, your intent is like, hey, let's make this a bit of a challenging encounter for the party. I actually did this for my second session, and the players were around level 10 or 11, I think. And uh, they had a melee user, but who could also use guns. They had a gun user, and I think that there was a summoner, and they had Pixie, who has Zeo. So I was like, okay, this will be a cool mix-up because that adventure featured mostly undead who were weak to expel, and they're weak to fire, and those are two expel, maybe not so much, but the fire is pretty easy to get firestones, and they were told ahead of time, like, hey, these are undead and these are what they're weak to. So they're like stocking up on these things. So I threw this enemy in as a mix up. They're going to run into this, and their firestones are just going to be normal. Their melee attacks are going to be ineffective, and they're going to have to change their tactics. And that was the intent. So what I also did was that as they got closer, and this was more of a dungeon crawl, which I'll go over how to design those too. So it was much more combat heavy than what the book would normally prescribe, I think. But as they got closer to the area that had the bit ball in it, I started there. There were clues and other demons and NPCs that they could talk to gather information, or they would basically drop the information that there's something that isn't undead in this area, and it's also causing trouble. So that would pique their interest, just the fact that something like that existed, but they have the option of talking to more people, gathering more information. They could, and because that's also a use of the conversation target number, they can get basic bonus and service results based on if they crit or succeed or fail the roll. And I try to give the players that kind of avenue to figure out, okay, well, we know that there's something that's not undead. Okay, we're going to talk about it more. Okay, and now we know that it's a machine, which tells us a little bit. It's a little metagamey, but it's SMT, so at a certain point, the metagaminess is going to be consistent. Like most machines are weak to elect and either resist strike or gun or both, which they didn't know at the time. But then they go and they're like, okay, well, let's investigate more. Okay, we have the demon name, which is the bit ball. At that point, that's when they can basically, if they follow up on the demon name, then I just show them the stat block at that point if they succeed the conversation roll, because they've already been pursuing that information at each of those stages, right? And so now they would have the whole stat block and they say, oh, wow, he might resist strike, but that because he has physical endurance, which increases physical defense, even my gun attacks are not going to be very effective here. So we're going to need to either go buy some elect stones or just pray that Pixie can take care of it, or we're going to avoid it. All these different things. And this was just one enemy that I threw in just as a mix up, and it turned into a total session detour, which was intended, but the extent of which is not always known. And that's where I find the fun in GMing, is seeing what the players get hung up on, right? But this was a rather difficult enemy because it has life bonus, it has physical endurance. This makes it very tanky, like way beyond its level. It's very tanky. For whatever reason, its agility is crazy high, even though it does not have a gun attack. But that makes its dodge very high. And so it just turns into something that you can't just, hand wave. You can't just, oh, we'll just attack it until it's dead. Because that's going to be a battle of attrition, basically, especially if melee users or magic users, they're spending their MP and HP to whittle this guy down, all while it's dodging. It's got add initiative, so it probably went first in the fight. Just lots of stuff like that to keep in mind. And these weren't all things necessarily that I factored into choosing the bit ball. I just thought, hey, wouldn't it be funny to put something that wasn't undead here, that had totally different resistances, was kind of like a mini boss, something like that. Now, for most standard demons, you can use just their level, their affinities, and you probably just call it there, because you don't want to throw. If you have a wizard in the party and this guy nulls fire and he has no other attacks other than fire, you're kind of relegating that person to just using items or just using the aid action to aid other people. Or you throw in adventure specific items, like in this case for the bit ball, they did end up finding a Mazio stone or two, which the physical damage attackers were able to use quite effectively. So there's a lot that goes into choosing the demons, and when I get to the next video where I talk more about session planning and adventure prep and everything, I think I'll cover a little bit more in depth the sort of thought process to choosing the demons. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go over some of the higher, what's the best way to say it? High danger skills that demons can have that will basically throw you completely out of the loop. You'll be like, oh, but this demon is, I'm going to use the Talon next. This demon's level 21 and my party's level 18. Like, this should have been, why did it feel so one-sided? Why is this demon so ridiculously strong compared to other demons? Well, I'll show you. So, certain skills, we have physical endurance and magical endurance. These drastically increase the physical and magical defense of a demon. You can see that this demon is supposed to have 36 in both physical and magical defense, but because of physical endurance, that's a 51. Even assuming that, let's just take his own attack power, because I always like to compare a demon against itself or PC against themselves to see how they stack up damage and defense wise. With his strength and level, is melee power is his highest power, plus a d10. It would take an explosion and not rolling a 1 on that exploded d10 to even do 1 point of damage to itself. Ergo, this guy can't really hurt himself effectively. He takes very little to no damage from physical attacks. Oh, and he also resists strike. So, it's this is a tricky enemy. You can't just put this in front of any group. If the group has mostly physical attackers, even if they have mostly gun attackers, because look at this range damage. 10 range damage. You don't add level to range damage. Now, given most guns have a generous power value that gets added, but the PC, I mean, they have to beat 51 to even do 1 point of damage. And that's a pretty high hurdle for someone who would be level 21 or in that area. They'd be punching up very, very high. And so this demon right here, this is not a common demon. This is not one that you just say, oh yeah, you encounter 3 talons, that, just because there's 3 players, I think 3 talons would be good. There's one for each of you, basically. That would be probably a total party kill. And why is that? Well, because the defense value is very high. We've already discussed that. But now next, we're going to look down here at the skills. We see it also has melee use. There's another type of skill called range use. And what it does is it basically doubles their melee power for the purposes of quote-unquote weapon skills. So the weapon attack here is just the basic strike. The power is melee, so we have 40. And the modifier is 40, and that's from weapon use, or melee use. And so 40, 40, the total is 80. This guy, now I said before his base melee power compared to his defense, right? Like, yeah, well, if you double his melee power, 80 damage plus a d10 is quite good. Now cleave, this hits the whole front row. It has a 126% target number. So he could multi-action that, and he could hit the whole front row 2 times for 80 damage. He could hit it for 1 time for 80 damage. With basically a certainty that would be on the players to then dodge. The counter here is also very funny because technically counter is a weapon skill, or like you can use a weapon with counter, and so in this case he does. So he can elect to not dodge, rely on his resist strike, because you can only dodge strike attacks, or you can only counter strike attacks that occur in the front row. Just roll 50%. You probably won't even take damage from the attack that hit you. Return 80 damage. This is a menace of an enemy right here. And this is not an appropriate encounter to put in front of equivalent level PCs. Like this is one where like the PCs are maybe level 26. They're higher level than the Talon, and you throw one of these out there and it's still going to be like a little bit of a challenging fight just based on the numbers. All right, let's see Jack Ripper. Here we go. So in one of my sessions, I put Jack Ripper, and this is a very similar situation. Level 19 has melee use, consecutive attack, so he makes 2 attacks at 107%. Plus all these other, like he's got Sukukaja, he's got Secunda. These are some pretty spooky attacks, and I made this guy a optional super boss, and the party was level 7, They accidentally wandered into this guy first. He hit them one time, and they had used fate points, and luckily it hit the guy with the highest defense as well. So the 66 damage here was very impressive, even after all the reductions from fate and defense on that player. And they said, we've got to run away. So they did. And they were exploring the rest of the dungeon until they found a Messian church recovery facility. And they were asking the people at the church, hey, can we buy some holy shot or some holy arrows? Because there was an archer in the party too. What do we got to do to get this from you? Because um, the price per shot is very high. It's like 200 or 250, and they didn't have that much money between them, or maybe they did, but they didn't want to spend the entire party's money on one bullet. Um, Fair enough. So I basically just improvised a mini quest where it's like, oh yeah, if you guys go do this or that, then we'll discount it or we'll give you some free and all that. And so another detour occurred. And because I made this guy like a mini boss, so he actually had the 780 health, that kind of thing, but he didn't. I gave him 2 actions and I gave him the extra health, but I don't think there's something else I didn't do. Maybe I only gave him halfway to the boss's health. I forget. Regardless, this was also an enemy that was like over 10 levels on the party. And that meant that the XP at the end basically gets doubled as well. Um, so they got a lot of XP for killing this guy, which they eventually did by the gun user in the party got, I think he only got one holy shot. But he crit. And this guy's weak to expel. So the damage ignored his defense and was multiplied by 4 and basically took down whatever health he had. I think it was like 560 or something in the middle there. Whatever health he had, it basically he lost like 2/3 of it in one shot. Luckily, that wasn't on the first turn. Otherwise, that would have been a little anticlimactic. But even that still didn't kill him at the time. But it was a race of HP. I think both of the people in the front row almost died multiple times. They had to use almost all their fate points just to stay alive. Um, which is like, completely as I intended it, but how it actually shakes out, I don't know. But the reason why that this was so difficult was because melee use basically doubles the damage of the demon. Specifically, those deemed weapon attacks. So here, Chris the Car is kind of a funny one. So they don't have weapon use, and they don't have any weapon skills. But they do have range use, and the Curse Gear is a ranged attack. But you can see, like, in comparison to a lot of these other skills, like the unarmed attack, it's 42. And if that was being damaged, or doubled, the damage was doubled. This guy would just be doing tremendous damage. It'd just be crazy high. This guy's melee use. So it's just something to keep in mind. You have to watch out for melee use, and you have to watch out for the affinities. You need to watch out for physical and magical endurance. And then, buff and debuff skills are kind of a big deal. Like if you're low level and you drop a Tarunda on the on the player party, then they might just be doing 0 damage until they run away or have a Dakunda to cast. So here's Sukunda. If the party is very low level, which they shouldn't be fighting level 20 at very low level, but if the party has 30 to 50% target numbers and this guy casts Sukunda even one time, it could roll a 1 and it's not that big a deal, but it can be a really big what's the word? It skews the encounter favorability to the demon uh, in such a way that I would consider it an outlier. That you'd need to be aware that you're choosing a demon that has that kind of skill. Now, once you're in like the 15s to 20 range, buff and debuff skills are perfectly fair game in my opinion. But physical endurance, magical endurance, melee use, range use, those are the big ones. Some of the higher level enemies, they have like the booster type skills and the boost type skills, which are two different types, that will raise all firepower or all ice magic, etc. Those ones operate the similar capacity, but for magic attacks. Um, Usually those can be dealt with a little bit easier by someone buying like the fire resist talismans or having fire resist affinity if they're a demon. Lots of ways that you can deal with magical affinities, but again, these need to be communicated and telegraphed through the approach phases, information gathering, all that kind of stuff. Uh, and that's why that part of the game very heavily influences what kind of enemies you can throw in too. Because even if you have those demons down below that I said, like, well, the Jack Ripper, for example, he's way higher level. I gave him boss tier HP, 2 actions per turn. And now they stumbled into him right off the bat because they chose to go down a route. But they were able to run away, and throughout the rest of the dungeon, they were able to acquire information about Jack Ripper. Oh, he's weak to holy. Great. Where can we get some holy stuff? Where can we get some expel stones or holy shots? Just things of those nature. And they were able to take proactive measures against the boss rather than just running into it, stat checking it, and then failing the stat check, or otherwise the whole fight would just be like a slog because uh, they're just burning their fate points to stay alive, and they're doing just normal damage, not enhanced damage or anything. Um, and players are going to have more fun if they're able to make those kinds of proactive decisions and then have that cool, like, I don't want to say supernova, but supernova moment where uh, even if my gun using player hadn't have critted and it was just a weak attack, it still would have done a ton of damage. But because it also crit, it turned into a very memorable moment that they still talk about, and they see firsthand, like, oh, this is what we can do if we take the time to explore and find out everything we need to know about the boss. In this case, it was an optional boss, so they were kind of losing the plot a little bit for the regular boss, but the regular boss was actually way weaker than Jack Ripper. I think it was just a zombie dog, so the zombie dog's like level 11 or 12. Uh, it just it you can put a hard enemy. You can still say, well, it's got melee use and that's kind of dangerous, but oh, that's right. There is also an attack mirror. that the party would get after dealing with the bit ball situation in that dungeon. And they got the attack mirror after they had encountered Jack Ripper. So they immediately knew, like, oh, this is going to be really funny to use against Jack Ripper. But if they went a different way and didn't encounter Jack Ripper or only heard about it, and they were like, I mean, Jack Ripper, what's that? They might have used the attack mirror on a different encounter. Or they may have not encountered Jack Ripper at all. And, I put the attack mirror as the reward for dealing with the pitball, specifically for the Jack Ripper, so they can load up on consumable items to make the fight not trivial, but it can buy them a couple rounds of breathing room or the ability to deal damage to it effectively, like doing effective exploiting the weakness damage. And that's how I approach choosing demons. It doesn't matter which one you choose. This guy Noel's Fire, like, okay, give him. Well, he doesn't have a weakness, so that's kind of boring. But he has. Well, you can still put a magic mirror because he has fire boost. And that's what I was saying. Like, this guy does. His Augie Dine does 154 damage. That's a lot. And he can multi action it to 81% 2 times. Even if he nulls fire, put an attack mirror or a magic mirror in. Then they get to negate the damage for 1 round. And, maybe that's all they need. You don't need to put like 5 or 6 items or drown them in consumables. But you can basically use any demon if you're aware of its affinities, what its attack strengths are, and just giving them items that can help offset some of that if they take the time to explore and interact with all the different things that you've prepared in the session. Anyways, I think that this video's run on long enough, so that will wrap it up this time. Thanks for watching.